There is obviously a lot of information going on now about President Trump and his executive orders, of course, the travel ban. But there's another photo caption that's becoming somewhat of an internet sensation. It's not a major story because there's other things superseding it, but it's getting a bit of attention because the Deputy Prime Minister of Sweden has posted a photo which looks very much like it's parodying Donald Trump's or one of Donald Trump's executive orders. So, for a little bit of context, the photo is allegedly parodying is Donald Trump surrounded by, in that particular photo, predominantly, well, entirely male cabinet members, cabinet confirmations, signing an executive action on abortion issues. I believe it's about foreign abortion providers, a bill to block that. I don't know the exact details, but basically it's about abortion. Trump has described himself as a pro-life president, so that's the politics of it. Now, the deputy Swedish Prime Minister, Isabella Lövin, has posted this photo which looks very similar. She is signing a piece of legislation. In this case, it's not actually to do with gender, it's to do with climate change and a bill for a climate target by 2045. Again, I don't know the details. That's not so important. What's important here is that this is clearly a parody. Isabella Lovin is not denying it. Basically, what she has said is that we are a feminist government and people can interpret themselves what they take from this. I'll just quote her exactly. This is via, yeah, we are a feminist government which shows in this photo. Ultimately, it's up to the observer to interpret the photo, and it's her surrounded by, I think that's eight women ministers. So it's basically just the polar opposite of Trump's photo. Trump is Trump surrounded by male cabinet members, and this is Lovin surrounded by female cabinet members. Both photos are entirely, gender biased. Um, Clearly, she's trolling. I think she can deny it, but I think it's quite clear what she's doing there, and I think it's a little bit childish. It's not that I think Trump's executive order isn't uncontroversial. I can definitely see where the criticism lies. When you have male cabinet members deciding issues on women's health, that doesn't go down well, and I do actually understand the criticism of that. Uh, if for no other reason than diplomacy, he should have had a few women in the picture just to balance things out a bit. But it's two sides of the same coin. Um, I want to say a few things about Sweden, though. I want to just focus on that for a few minutes because it's came to my notice. It's sort of something that is a bit of a trend. There is this kind of snooty liberal superiority coming from a lot of the Swedish politicians, and that's been apparent in recent years. Now, let's start with a fact, and a fact that is hard to challenge. Sweden is one of the most advanced countries in the world. It's a very rich country. It's got very high levels of human development, so it ranks highly on the Human Development Index. Very low corruption levels. Um, it's well up there on the Human Development Index. I don't think anyone is going to dispute that. But in in sort of promoting this, sometimes for a start, I think they give this arrogant impression that they are this sort of liberal utopia. Sweden has its problems, and Sweden actually has some serious problems that have kind of broken through the cracks in recent months, but really say a lot. Now, it goes without saying that feminism in Sweden is very dominant in politics, arguably more so than any other country. And the same is true of Norway and other Nordic states. In fact, a few years ago in Norway, there was a group called Feminist Initiative, a new party. That actually led to some tensions among the left because they felt that it would take away votes from mainstream left wing parties. I don't think they done exceptionally well in the polls, but the point is, feminism is deeply entrenched in Swedish and Norwegian, in this case, it was Norwegian politics as well. And I appreciate Norway and Sweden are two different countries, but there are similarities in terms of the role that feminism plays, and I think that's obvious. Um, Firstly, in terms of egalitarianism, at least surface egalitarianism, representation in government positions, Sweden isn't actually number one in the world. Number one is Rwanda, believe it or not. And that might surprise a lot of people because when we hear Rwanda, almost immediately the first thing people think of is the devastating genocide of 1994. In fact, it may well be for that reason. Obviously, in that terrible event, tens of thousands of people were massacred. It could be that more men were killed. I don't know, to be honest, but that could be why there are more women in the Rwandan parliament than men. I think it is the only parliament in the world where there's actually slightly more women. Even Sweden doesn't have a higher percentage of women than men. But I do want to critique Swedish feminism because, and Nordic feminism in general. Um, a few years back, I think it was 2013, there were a lot of reports circulating that there was a Swedish group that was actually trying to get criticism of feminism banned. Now, if you really think about the implications of this, it is quite, actually quite unsettling. Um, and around the same year, to be fair, Margot Wallström, who was then Foreign Minister of Sweden, did speak out against. Actually, that was 2015. Yeah, sorry, excuse me. 2015, Margot Wallström did speak out against the human rights abuses in Saudi Arabia and its appalling treatment of women. So I'll give her credit for that. At least she is consistent. One of my main criticisms of Western feminism is tends to turn a blind to Islamic theocracies. It tends to focus more on perceived patriarchal crimes in the West. So I give Margot Wallström her credit for that. But there is a trend among Nordic feminist groups for, frankly, intolerance, all under the guise of egalitarianism. Apparently, this group, was reported around 2013, um, comes from, I'm just trying to read a report here from the website doesn't seem to have a name, so it's not the best website out there. But there's a few different sources for this. Um, Criminalize anti-feminist statements in the public debate, just as hate speech is criminalized today. A tax-funded Nordic expert group of 35 experts on anti-feminism, experts on anti-feminism, no bias there, and right-wing extremism proposed this in a report to the Norwegian government. Now, looking into this, I'm not going to read out the whole report, but the problem is, and this is an understatement, it seems to be very, very loosely defined. For example, men aggressively arguing against feminism. Who gets to define aggressively arguing? It says men who harass, bully, and threaten female debaters and feminists over the internet belong into the category of anti feminists. We can also include men debating equality through unfair and aggressive statements. This sounds almost akin to something the Chinese Communist Party would say, not on the gender issue, but in terms of unfair and aggressive statements. That is very vague. Um, Now, harassment and bullying is one thing, and I will never condone that. So, if you do get men's rights activists, sending violent threats against female politicians, that's wrong, or any politicians for that matter. It's not useful for democracy. But this is clearly very loosely defined. I don't know how far this movement went. I don't know if it got up to the government level. It wouldn't surprise me if there were senior government ministers who looked at it favourably. Like I say, feminism is deeply entrenched in the Nordic psyche. Of course, there is no equilibrium of women who harass, bully, and threaten other women. One well known example is Erin Picey, who was one of the first advocates of providing domestic violence shelters. Since then, she has been viciously targeted by hate-filled feminists who just don't like the fact that a woman is acknowledging that men can also be abused. Um, that's what I find very obnoxious about the Nordic argument in this, is that there is absolutely no consistency for extreme feminists who blatantly hate men and who spread misandry. You cannot talk about egalitarianism if you're saying we stand against misogyny, but hey, misandry is okay. Let's laugh at male tears. Um, and I'm just not convinced that these countries are the absolute utopia they make themselves out to be. Don't get me wrong, they have many merits. They are developed and advanced countries. But I'll give an example of this, of some of the problems that lie in, that, really cast a little bit of a shadow over this claim. In Sweden, not long ago, there were reports of migrant men raping women in Malmo, which is a sizable city in the south. And apparently, those cases have been kind of underreported because Swedish state multiculturalism dictates that if you report on migrants committing crime, then it's destroying community cohesion. Um, so if these feminists really are interested in egalitarianism and they want to be consistent, like I say, Margot Wallström was, but I would like to see more feminists being a bit more consistent in this. Of course, that's a contradiction because then it would mean they have to attack multiculturalism. And this is a very curious sort of alignment between Islamist apologists and feminists. It's an interesting thing, because they both see right wing white men as pure evil, And I'm not a right wing man; I'm a centrist man, but I detest that sort of hypocrisy. Um, and I just think there is a real liberal smugness that comes from the Nordic countries. They think they're better than everyone else, and they constantly think they can preach about it. I remember when the EU debates were going on in this country leading up to Brexit. Um, I believe it was Margot Wallström actually. Again, was sort of she was sort of telling the UK, and talking down to the UK, like Euroscepticism makes you an idiot, and so on. I voted Remain, but what the Remain side needs to understand is that this sort of snootiness, like we're more intelligent than you, and we are advanced, and you're just the right wing plebs who follow dictators like Trump. The problem with this is it stinks of snobbery. And frankly, Margot Wallström represents everything that is wrong with this sort of Eurocentrist mentality. And I'm saying that as someone who voted Remain. That arrogance is very obvious. So to come back to the original point, I spoke a bit longer here than I intended, but to come back to the original point, yes, Trump's photo is very problematic, and I'm pro-choice, so I certainly wouldn't approve of that legislative action. But it's not a case of defending the executive order. It's more calling out the agenda of. I mean, she said, "We're a feminist government," and that shows in this photograph. So what's the message with that? That feminism therefore means having an all-women cabinet? I thought feminism was about equality. So make your mind up. If it's about equality, then why not have a photograph with some men in there as well to show that, oh, they're progressive men, they agree with us. Um, So I think there's a lot of sticking points with Sweden's rather obnoxious claims that it is the best country on earth. Actually, I don't know if there is any country that can truly call itself the best country on earth because every country has flaws. America's the most powerful country. I don't think it's necessarily the best. It's the most powerful. It's a great country. There's many things about the United States I don't like, and I think Donald Trump's mouth is a liability. A president who deals with foreign affairs through Twitter, I'd be somewhat embarrassed by that, even as a Trump supporter. But, all I would take from this is that Sweden shouldn't be too smug. Sweden is not a perfect society, and aggressive feminism is not going to convince true egalitarians that it really is about equality. It's about ramming it down people's throats and saying we demand equality but not equal responsibility. I have no doubt the very same feminists would be opposed to women going to prison. Of course, being Sweden, very few people go to prison, but that's beside the point. Anyway, this video is not sort of bashing Sweden as a country. Sweden has many merits. I'm sure it's got many charms, but I'm getting a little bit tired of Nordic arrogance. And what I mean by that is whenever I see, and I say Nordic in that generalizing sense because it's pretty similar from the Norwegian and Swedish and Finnish to a lesser extent governments. Um, there is a sort of superiority mindset. We are a liberal utopia, and the rest of the world should copy us. Except that there is actually, a lot of chinks in this facade that they put on. Um, Not least the very serious problems they are currently facing with multiculturalism versus reality. So let me know your thoughts. If you're Swedish, what do you think of this? And that's another thing. Sometimes liberals from these countries tend to talk like they represent everyone. Sweden's a democracy. Sweden. I'm sure there are people among Sweden's 9 million people who don't like this any more than I do. Just like there are Americans who don't like Trump. So I think the photo that she posted is a little bit childish. I think, yeah, she can criticize Trump. That just, to me, it just seems a bit childish, and yeah, it's got flaws. Let me know your thoughts.